The wheel of the year is ever turning. Autumn passes to winter, winter to spring, and so surely as the first frosts once took the earth, so spring blooms into summer. At the height of the season is June, and it is in this month, at the very pinnacle of the year, that we find the ancient celebration of Midsummer. In this video, I will explore the customs and history of the celebration throughout Europe, both its ancient past and its more recent developments. We will find a time of tipping points, of high ascent, and of beginning decline, where the old meets the new, and the new the old. For 2,000 years, Midsummer has been a key time in Christendom, namely St. John's Eve, the birth of the Baptist. Even before then, and after, in the parts not Christianized, the summer solstice has always been an auspicious time. It is here that the land is at its greenest, the days at their longest, and all the earth most vigorously fertile. If midwinter is a time where the earth is dead, the high days of June speak of life and the joys of the world. Yet even as midwinter carries a secret promise, the lengthening of the days, the birth of Christ, so midsummer has a darker side. It is the longest day of the year, yes, but also the beginning of their shortening. It is the peak of fertility and the onset of decay. It has long been called fitting that John the Baptist, whose birth 6 months presaged that of Jesus, said of him, "He must increase, but I must decrease." The lengthening days of the year have ended, the anticipation of summer is over. Still many warm days await, yet the wheel turns and autumn looms ahead. As noted, the tradition of feasting at midsummer is very old. It reaches back far into prehistory, beyond all records, though perhaps not all reckoning. The traditional explanation of midsummer is that of a fertility cult. It is not an altogether implausible claim. There are, even today, numerous customs and traditions throughout Europe which connect the solstice with an increase of fertility. During the Slavic festival of Cupola, girls set flower wreaths down rivers, tracing their movements to discern their romantic fortunes. In Spanish Galicia, women seeking fertility will bathe in the ocean, where they wait until they have been touched by 9 waves. In Finland, young maidens used to stand naked, peering into wells, where they hoped to catch glimpses of their future spouses. The number 9 even recurs in Sweden, where it is an old custom that unmarried girls who place varyingly 7 or 9 different flowers beneath their pillows shall dream of their coming husbands. A particularly intriguing and widespread legend is that of the fern flower, which blooms only on the eve of the summer solstice. The myth is spread throughout northeastern Europe, featuring in midsummer festivals from Cupola to the Estonian Jaaniõhtu, the night before Jaanipäev, that is, St. John's Day. The exact boon conferred by the discovery of the flower varies from land to land, but it may be anything from luck to power to a gift of fertility. Ferns are not, in fact, flowering plants at all, and are thus incapable of blooming, but then, perhaps we have merely been watching them at the wrong time. Another very important tradition is that of the maypole. As the name indicates, these poles are typically erected for the festivities at May Day or Whitsun, but are sometimes raised at midsummer. This is particularly noticeable in Denmark, where the pole is called the majstang, maypole, but used to be raised around St. John's Eve. Today, however, that tradition is almost extinct, having given way in favor of lighting bonfires. To that practice we shall return later. If we wish to see a living tradition of the maypole, we may jump over to the neighbouring Sweden. Among the Swedes, who more aptly term the object the midsommarstång, the midsummer pole, the tradition remains in high health. Even among the Swedish populations of other nations, such as the Swedish-speaking Finns, the practice is still widespread. The origins of the maypole have long been debated. It has been claimed that the tradition dates back from pre-Christian times, and that the poles are symbols of the axis mundi, the world navel, where grows the great tree of Yggdrasil or Irminsul. Certainly the pole is a central object in the celebrations, around which people dance in circling movements. Yet the evidence here is not strong. In fact, it's entirely lacking. To posit a connection with the world tree may seem interesting, even plausible, but it is also a grand claim, and one without grand evidence. It has also been asserted that the maypole is a phallic symbol, connected then, no doubt, with the fertility aspects of Midsummer. But then, it seems like more or less every even vaguely cylindrical object has by now been termed phallic by one Freudian or another, so that might be inconclusive. Again, the evidence is lacking. That the raising of the maypole should be a pagan relic seems fully plausible, but what its exact meaning was may be lost to time. Perhaps, as philosopher and historian of religion Mircea Eliade suggested, the decorating of a tall pole with flowers and verdant greenery was simply an expression of the joy of summer and of growth. Of St. John the Baptist, it is told in the Gospel of Luke that when the Archangel Gabriel appeared to inform the Virgin Mary of Christ's conception, he also told her that her cousin, Elizabeth, was 6 months pregnant. Thus it was that St. John and Jesus were born at the diametric opposites of the year, one upon each solstice. Christ at the darkest, growing to light, St. John at the brightest, turning to dark. The fact that St. John's Eve, supposedly celebrating his birth precisely 6 months before Christ's, is nonetheless held on the 24th of June, not the 25th, has been the cause of much discussion. Frequently, it has been posited that this was one of the many attempts by the early church to co-opt pagan festivals, intentionally moving St. John's Eve to concur with the pre-existing Midsummer traditions. Again, however, this seems untenable. Inaccuracies in the Julian calendar meant that Midsummer was not celebrated on the 24th during the Middle Ages, but instead earlier in the month, making it quite unlikely that the church should have moved the feast to coincide with a festival that was not yet placed there. And besides, a better explanation exists. The fixing of the date of St. John's Eve occurred in a Roman context, and the Romans counted using the calends. The calends, from which we get the word calendar, are the first day of every month. The Romans would count backwards from them, so that Christ's birth was octavo calendus Januari, that is, the 8th day before the calends of January. By the same reasoning, St. John's birth would have been the 8th day before the calends of July, yet June has only 30 days, wherefore the feast falls on the 24th, not the 25th. Today, St. John's Eve and its many local variants are generally indistinguishable from Midsummer itself. In Russia, where the aforementioned holiday of Kupala is practiced, it is often termed Ivana Kupala, Ivan being the Slavic form of John. While in Sweden, the celebration is known as Midsummer, in Denmark it is almost always called Sanctens, that is, St. John's. While the conjunction of St. John's Eve with Midsummer seems a genuine coincidence, or at least unplanned for, it has not always been an easy coexistence. Midsummer is, as prior discussed, laden with connotations of fertility, and, interestingly, with divination. As the peak of the year, it is, in a way, a vantage point from which the discerning eye may hope to trace the contours of the coming months. In the 12th century, the Bishop of Exeter, Bartholomew Iscanus, declared, "He who at the feast of St. John the Baptist does any work of sorcery to seek out the future, shall do penance for 15 days. There's much more that may be said on the topic of Midsummer. It is a time of spirits and of sorcery. In Romania, the festival of San Ziene, which lies at the solstice, is a time of fairies and of magic. Treated carefully, these may be benevolent, blessing the people and their crops. Yet if a man comes across them in the forest at night, they will maim him, or drive him mad. In Denmark, an effigy of a witch is burnt atop the bonfire, for it is believed that St. John's Eve is also the night of the witches' Sabbath, when they gather atop the peak of Mount Blocksberg. It is the tradition of the bonfires to which I will now turn. Perhaps surprisingly, our earliest references to this practice are actually rather late. The first mention of people lighting bonfires in connection with St. John's Eve comes from the 12th century Parisian theologian Johannes Bilitus. Earlier than this, be it pagan practices or Christian customs, we know nothing. This does not mean, of course, that the tradition itself dates only to the High Middle Ages. the custom of the bonfire does seem, it might be said, to be of a rather ancient sort of practice. It is often connected with the banishing of evil spirits. The tradition is also very widely distributed, found all throughout Europe and even northern Africa. That last fact may hint at a venerable Christian origin, dating back to the time when Africa was still part of Christendom, before the Arab conquests. Or perhaps the various traditions are not all connected, with some of pagan origin. In many parts of Europe, it is believed that leaping over the bonfire confers good health and fertility, a legend which may point back to the ancient festivals of the fertile summer, and perhaps even of fire worship. This, then, is the peculiar duality of Midsummer. It is the day when winter seems the furthest, and the start of winter's approach. It is a festival of health and vigour, and a time of dark spirits and witches. It is one of the great feasts of Christendom, and one of the strongest holdouts of the pre-Christian. It is old and new, new but old. At the very height of summer, it points towards winter, just as winter, in the cradle, in the longest night, points towards spring, and beyond that, to a hope of summer.